What an incredible year it has been for the UFC. We've had some awesome events, some incredible turnouts, we've had upsets, we've had reigning champions defending their honor and proving to us that they deserve to be in their position, pound for pound changes in the list, all of the above. We're here today, ladies and gentlemen, for a UFC 2023 pay-per-view tier list. So, I am going to be here on this website here, Tier Maker, and we have a list of all of the pay-per-views that have happened so far in 2023, bar UFC 296, as I mentioned, have happened. So, UFC 295 being the most recent event, that is going to be the last event that we add to this list, and we're going to start with UFC 283. So I'm going to pull up the cards that we had for these as well, just to have a look at them. I'm not going to talk too deeply about every single card, but it will be good to have a reference point so that I can speak about the differences. Beginning with 283. So obviously we have Paul Craig versus Johnny Walker, who's a cool fight that was on that card. Gilbert Burns versus Neil Magny, Davison Figueiredo versus Brandon Moreno, and Glover Teixeira versus Jamal Hill. So, simply based off of Glover Teixeira versus Jamal Hill, which was an awesome fucking fight, I'm going to say that this card definitely deserves to have a decent ranking. And Figgy versus Moreno, I think that was their fourth fight at UFC 283. I'd say that plays a pretty big pivotal role in the flyweight division, and that was a very necessary outcome because of the draw that happened, and this was the fight that it split it from being 1-1, right? So I may make some adjustments towards the end and reconfigure the list to be more suited to my liking, but I'm going to start with UFC 283 as a B ranking. Next, moving on to UFC 284, what a banger. This was the first UFC I ever made a reaction video to, also the first one I ever bought a pay-per-view for and watched live, so this event holds a place in my heart, I can say for sure. It was very controversial with the decision, but aside from the main event, which was awesome and probably in contention for one of the best fights of the year, there was an awesome fucking card underneath this one. Even some of the prelim fights were very, very awesome, given that it was an Australian card and had a lot of Australian fighters on it. But main card, we had Jimmy Crute versus Alonzo Menafield, which was a cool fucking fight. Came to a draw at the end, sadly. Justin Tafa versus Parker Porter, 1 minute in knockout, very, very nice. Jack Della Maddalena got that submission over Randy Brown in the first round, very, very nice. Yair Rodriguez got that submission over Josh Emmett, which was a fucking cool fight, and it got Yair to be the interim champion, very, very nice. I think that this is one of the better cards that happened this year, so I think I'm going to go up there and say that UFC 284 is probably an S tier card. Next up, we have UFC 285. So, Jones versus Gunn and Shevchenko versus Grasso. I really, really enjoyed this event. While I was quite upset with the outcome of the main event, I have to say the co-main event really shined for me. Valentina Shevchenko versus Alexa Grasso. Round 4 submission gets Alexa Grasso to be the new women's flyweight champion. First in a long time, first to ever break Valentina Shevchenko's streak as a champion in that division. Awesome stuff. We had Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Jeff Neal, which was a dope fucking fight before that one. Matosh Gamo versus Jaylord Turner, as well as Bo Nickel with the first round submission over Jamie Pickett. While the John Jones fight was a bit of a letdown in this one, it was still a John Jones fight, so you can't really complain too much, but I'm not really going to use that as a point of ranking this. I'm going to say that the Shevchenko versus Grasso fight and the Rakhmonov versus Jeff Neal fight is probably my two picks of what I enjoyed most on this card, and I'm going to use those to say I think that this one sits pretty comfortably at an A. I don't think it's one of the best cards of this year, but I do think it's certainly up there. Up next, we have UFC 286. So, I quite enjoyed this card, however, I wasn't necessarily able to enjoy a lot of the earlier fights on the card because I was still pretty new. I didn't recognize any of the names in this one, so I only really watched the co-main event and main event, which, may I add, were fucking awesome. Edwards versus Usman 3 obviously was the consolidation of Leon Edwards as the UFC welterweight champion after his lucky KO over Usman back in 2022. This one was the rematch to prove whether he could really do it again or if that was just a stroke of luck, and he proved to us that he was able to get it done again and that he was indeed the better fighter over Usman even after being dominated for a lot of that fight. In the co-main event, we had Justin Gaethje versus Rafael Fiziev, which, much like I said with the Volkanovski versus Makhachev fight, I think is contender for one of the best fights of the year. This was a fucking war. Gaethje decided to go down, give a contender a shot, fight a contender to get himself back in that point of establishing himself as one of the best guys in the division after he had lost to Oliveira. He did so in fucking great fashion. Admittedly though, Fiziev did very, very well considering he was fighting Justin fucking Gaethje. I fucking enjoyed that, and I think I'm going to be able to give this one a solid A. Up next, we have UFC 287, Pereira versus Adesanya 2. Obviously, we had Gilbert Burns versus Jorge Masvidal as the co-main event, which was not necessarily a bad fight, but it was Jorge Masvidal's retirement fight, and he did lose. Rob Font versus Adrian Yanez. This was a nice one. I really fucking liked this fight. It was very, very short. First round KO, but man, Font got a fucking dirty knockout over Yanez in that one, so that was a cool fucking performance. Kevin Holland, round 3 KO over Santiago Ponzinibbio. That one was also very, very nice. I enjoy watching that one. But we had Raul Rosas Jr. I think this was his debut after his Contender Series fight. If it wasn't his debut, it was his second fight in the UFC. And he lost to Christian Rodriguez, which is... It was sad to see because it broke his unbeaten record, and it did kind of prove that maybe this contender wasn't as much of a shining star as we thought he would be, and maybe he was being thrown too deep into the waters at too young of an age with too little experience. While Raul has since been able to show a bit more skill, it was definitely a bit of a letdown for that fight. But in the main event, some will love it, some will hate it. It is undeniable to say that this was a legacy fight, and it proved a lot of people wrong as well as proved a lot of people right. Two legends of the sport. We have Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya 2, ending in a second round KO. Obviously, as we all know, Izzy got that legendary knockout over Pereira after being on a 3-fight losing streak to him. While it was sad to see Pereira go like that, it was fucking awesome to see Izzy have that comeback. It is also the most viewed video on my channel by far. One of like the first 10 videos I ever uploaded. We had some cool matchups, some big names on it. So I think I can pretty comfortably say that this one was an A tier. Okay, up next, controversial one. Yeah, this one is a bit harder to justify putting at a high ranking. This is UFC 288. I would like to preface this with saying Aljamain Sterling versus Henry Cejudo is another one of my favorite fights to happen this year. I think that it was a very close fight, and it was very hard to tell who won that fight. I would have loved to have seen a rematch between them to see if one of them could cement themselves with a much more established victory. At the end of the day, we saw, obviously, Aljamain went on to fight Sean O'Malley later on. Aside from the main event, we had Bilal Muhammad versus Gilbert Burns, which was a very, very big letdown of a fight. Gilbert Burns was injured very early on in the fight because he had been just in that fight that I mentioned earlier at UFC 287, Masvidal, and then about 5 weeks later he came back to fight Bilal Muhammad at this card. Granted, it's all on Burns. It's his mistake. He chose to do that, and this is the fighting game. It's how it goes. It was just sad to see that the fight went the way it did, where it was a very slow fight, not a lot of output, and even with Burns' injury, Bilal still really couldn't get a dominant finish in any way over the fight. It still went to a decision, 5 rounds. While I like Gilbert Burns, that was definitely a bit of a letdown of a fight. Movsar Evliov versus Diego Lopez. I did not watch this fight, but I see it went to a decision. Wow, I need to watch that fight. 183 strikes to 48 with 4 of 7 takedowns for Movsar. No wonder it was a unanimous decision. Oh my god. And below that, we had Kron Gracie versus Charles Jourdain. Obviously, a good victory for Charles Jourdain, a big name, as well as a dominant victory. But a very, very sad turnout for the Gracie name, as well as Kron Gracie as an athlete in general. While I loved the Aljamain Sterling versus Henry Cejudo main event, the rest of this card was pretty lackluster. So I think what I'm going to put this one at is a C ranking. Next up, we have Nunes versus Aldana, UFC 289. So this event there was a lot of shit talk about this event. Obviously, it was Nunes' retirement fight, and it was against Aldana, who was not a good enough fighter to be in there with Nunes. Clearly, Pena was there in the crowd, and she watched Nunes retire without ever getting to get that trilogy in with her. So sad to see. But Charles Oliveira versus Benil Dariush was a fucking banger. Obviously, we saw Oliveira have his comeback after his loss to Makhachev. He managed to retain his title as the GOAT of the lightweight division, in my opinion. Currently, Makhachev is obviously the champion, but I would not say that he is necessarily on a level of achievement that Oliveira is. From what we've seen, he has more skills than Oliveira, being that he's beaten him, but I think that his level of achievement is not quite there yet. Getting there though, for sure, especially if he is to rematch him and fight Gaethje. That's going to get him above Oliveira in terms of level of achievement in that division. I was not a huge fan of the majority of this card, but I did like the co-main event and the Mike Mallet fight just before that one, so I'm going to say this one is a solid C as well. Up next, we have UFC 290. What a fucking banger of a card. Obviously, International Fight Week, the UFC wanted to put on something awesome for this one. We had a dope main card. We had Bo Nickel versus Val Woodburn with that 38-second knockout from Bo Nickel. Good victory to add to his name. While Val Woodburn was not a big name opponent, it was a very quick finish and in dominant fashion, so you got to give it to him there. Dan Hooker versus Jalen Turner. One of the best fights of this year. Another one that I would say is contender for one of the fights of the year. What a fucking war those two went to. Jalen Turner showed a lot of heart, and Dan Hooker proved that he's still that fucking guy. He's the dog, and he knows how to go to war and survive harsh conditions. He broke his arm. He broke his orbital bone from a head kick that Jalen landed and still managed to tough it out and win the fucking fight by a decision. Rob Whittaker versus Dricus du Plessis. As sad as an outcome of that was, man, Dricus proved a lot of people wrong and did it in a fucking dominant way. While it might be sad to have seen Robert lose, it was a good fight and the theatrics were there for sure. You can't say that it was a bad fight. Moreno versus Pantoja for the co-main event. Another one of the, not to say that I would put it up there, but a lot of people do, that they put Moreno versus Pantoja as one of the best fights of this year also, and I can see why. I do remember watching it and it was a fucking war. Pantoja managed to stick onto the back of Moreno for a lot of that fight and land a lot of strikes. It was pretty dominant and inevitably crowned Pantoja as the new flyweight champion. And as the main event, we had Volkanovski versus Yair Rodriguez, the interim versus undisputed champion, to unify the belts. Volkanovski did it in fucking dominant fashion. He was performing great throughout the first 2 rounds, had Yair on the back leg a lot of the time, managed to keep Yair's kicks to a minimum and suppress a lot of the damage that he would expect to take from Yair being there constantly with those kicks, and the high kicks especially, as we've seen, is a bit of a weakness for Volkanovski. Big slam to the ground in that 3rd round and finished Yair off with the ground and pound. Fucking beautiful. I'm going to say that this is one of the best cards of this year, and I'm going to put it up there in the S tier as one of the best. UFC 291. Ooh, this was some good back-to-back events for pay-per-view. We had a lot of fucking big names on this one. We had Michael Chiesa versus Kevin Holland. Early submission for Kevin Holland. Got a great victory over Michael Chiesa with that D'Arce choke. Very, very nice. Next fight was quite sad, but Bobby Green versus Tony Ferguson. I think Bobby broke a losing streak with that fight, so he managed to get himself back into the column, and inevitably this is the fight that got him a ranked fight with Grant Dawson later on in the year. After that, we had Derek Lewis with that 33-second finish after the flying knee. That broke Derek Lewis's losing streak and got a lot of fans back on his side. While no one necessarily was against him, a lot of people thought that maybe this was the end of Derek Lewis, and this proved that he still has that heavyweight ability to just go in there and slap you up and end the fight quickly. Co-main event, we had Jan Blachowicz versus Alex Pereira. A close fight. Awesome to see Pereira be able to strike well and keep up in the light heavyweight division. We already knew he could do so because he had fought at that weight class in glory, but it was nice to see, and he was able to do pretty well to combat the takedowns, grappling, and submissions of Blachowicz, and inevitably that fight got him that title fight with Prohaska. And the fight that we all remember from this event, the main event with Justin Gaethje, the second head kick to be heard around the world, and it was also in the same arena that Leon Edwards did so to Kamaru Usman. The head kick against Dustin Poirier, 2nd round. We were expecting this fight to be a fucking long drawn out war like the first one was, and Gaethje just said, nah, not today, and shut Poirier's lights off with that head kick. Highlight reel for the highlight. What a good fight. This definitely put the cherry on top of this card of already a really, really good bout of nice fights before that. I think I'm going to put this one as an A ranked. Okay, coming into the latter half of the year, we have UFC 292, Sterling versus O'Malley. What a fucking card this was, amongst the main event being an awesome one. Obviously, we had Amanda Lemos versus Weili, Zhang Weili versus Amanda Lemos. Awesome stuff from Weili. Fucking dominant performance. Just looking at the numbers here, thrown strikes is 358 to 68 for Weili. That is insane. Wasn't even close. Complete whitewash, absolute mismatch. Weili shows that she's still the strawweight GOAT. Below that, we had Neil Magny versus Ian Gary, which was a cool one, granted on short notice, and clearly Magny was not very well prepared for the fight, but Gary managed to defeat him in pretty dominant fashion, or over doubling his strike output and inevitably getting himself to a unanimous decision. Below that, we had Marlon Vera versus Pedro Munoz. Chito Vera managed to get himself the victory, and inevitably this is the fight that scored him the title shot with the now champion Sean O'Malley, who in the second round got a knockout over Aljamain Sterling, and this is a very big contender for what a lot of people would say is knockout of the year, as well as just one of the biggest knockouts we've seen in quite a long time. Sean O'Malley, huge underdog going into that fight, thought that he would not even be able to remotely keep up with Aljamain's grappling, as well as just his output in general and his pace. But O'Malley managed to stay alive for the first round, even with the rib injury he was dealing with quietly that he did not let everyone know about. He managed to defend the takedowns, keep himself on the feet, and in the second round, put the hands to work and managed to snipe the chin of Aljamain Sterling, put him down on the ground, finished it off with hammer fists, and got himself his first UFC championship victory. So with that, I'm going to say UFC 292 was quite a good card with a lot of nice fights on it. The undercard wasn't too hugely entertaining as much as it was just a decent showing of some cool fights, but with the main event being as awesome as it was, I think this one inevitably deserves to also be rated as an A. I'm going to make an amendment here in the middle as I'm looking at the rest of these rankings that I have. I think it's a little bit unfair that I've put UFC 289 alongside UFC 288, so I am actually going to move 289 down to the lowest ranking of D. I'm also going to make the adjustment of putting UFC 288 in the B tier, and I'm going to move UFC 283 down to the C tier. Next we have UFC 293, Adesanya versus Strickland. This fight gave me fucking chills watching it, man. I was so on the side of Strickland. As much as I am an Adesanya fan, I wanted Strickland to win so badly because I knew he could do it, and a lot of people counted him out and said there was no chance and that this was the biggest mismatch of the year, but it really wasn't. Strickland had the tools to beat Adesanya, and he used them. He showed everyone that he did have the ability to do it, and he did it in dominant fashion. That is obviously a very big proponent of why this card is going to be one of the higher ranked on this list. But moving down, we had Alexander Volkov versus Tai Tuivasa. A sad thing to see with Tai going on another loss in his stint that he is currently on. Flyweight, we had Manel Kape versus Felipe dos Santos, which was a super high output fight that a lot of people gave very big props to. Also another one that a lot of people vote for one of the best fights of the year. They did get bonuses. I'm not sure if it was performance bonus. I believe it was fight of the night bonus. That one definitely also boosts the prowess of this card. Below that, we had Tyson Pedro versus Anton Turkalij, or the Pleasure Man, where Tyson Pedro got that first round knockout with that awesome memorable celebration that everybody knows and loves with the samurai sword and the bow. Fucking awesome. Good theatrics and very entertaining. And just above that, we had Justin Tafa versus Austin Lane rematching after their no contest on the Emmett versus Topuria card, and Justin Tafa got that first round knockout over Austin, slept him with one big shot, followed him to the ground and landed hook after hook after hook and just flattened him and put him out. So with lots of theatrics and lots of finishes on this card, granted the main event and the fight before the co-main event were decisions, but they were very big fights and very big wars. So aside from those big fights that were good decisions, we had some good finishes. So I think this card definitely gets to be up there, and I'm going to have to say this one gets ranked at an A as well. Next up, we have UFC 294. What a fucking good card this was. Obviously, we had the sad downfall of Volkanovski, so I don't need to say much about that one. We all know how that went down. Islam Makhachev managed to end that rivalry with the first round KO with the head kick over Volkanovski, getting everything done and dusted and saying, I don't want to be a part of this anymore. I'm better than this guy. don't chat to me. And hey, there's not much we can say about it, man. He fucking proved his abilities because of how quick and how dominant of a finish it was. You just got to give Makhachev his props there. Below that, we had Kamaru Usman versus Khamzat Chimaev, which I loved. That was an awesome fight, very entertaining, and I did enjoy watching it. Sad to see that Khamzat got a injury in the first round, so the second and third round were much slower, and he did not have the ability to keep the pace up that he had in the first round. But just off that first round alone, it was a fucking high pace, high output performance from Chimaev, and he showed that he can do that against even the highest of ability guys like Kamaru Usman. Below that, a much sadder one, we had Magomed Ankalaev versus Johnny Walker, that no contest from the illegal knee Ankalaev threw. Don't have much to say about that. We saw it. It was upsetting, especially with the way that it was ended, with a doctor stoppage, essentially, is what that was. So it was dumb, and that's definitely going to take a toll on this card. Below that, though, we had Ikram Aliskerov versus Wally Alves. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. Ikram got that first round flying knee. I believe it was actually from punches that he got the KO, but the flying knee is what pretty much put an end to the fight. And Said Nurmagomedov got that first round submission, 1 minute 13 seconds over Muin Gafurov. So while this was a awesome card, there was some sad moments within it. Obviously, like I said, with Kamaru and Khamzat slowing down a lot towards the end of the fight. Ankalaev and Johnny Walker not ending up going the way that we were hoping. While this was an awesome card, I think I am inevitably going to have to put it in the B tier. Another quick adjustment I want to make to this list. I'm going to say that my assessment of UFC 286 was a little bit a little bit overzealous. While I still love the card and those top two off the bill were some awesome fights, I don't think it is quite up to par with some of the other cards that are in this A ranking, so I'm just going to drop it down into the B ranking. And for the last card of the year that we have had so far, not the last to occur, UFC 295 with Yuri Prochazka versus Alex Pereira and Tom Aspinall versus Sergey Pavlovich. We had some cool fights in the bottom of this card. Diego Lopez obviously got that first round KO over Pat Sabatini. Very fast, very dominant. Awesome showing, you love to see it. Matt Frivola versus Benoit Saint Denis, one of my favorite fights this year. That head kick was nuts. The calculation on it was absolutely dope. If you want to go check out my video on it, you will see my reaction. I loved it, and that was one of my favorite fights on this card. Next up, we had Jessica Andrade versus Mackenzie Dern. Obviously, a bit of a hole in Mackenzie's game in the striking realm is what Andrade managed to prove to us by outboxing her and getting about, I think it was 3, maybe 4 knockdowns on Dern before the fight was put to an end. The co-main event, Sergey Pavlovich versus Tom Aspinall. Obviously, this one was a banger. We saw Tom get that awesome knockout over Sergey to get himself the interim heavyweight title, and what a knockout it was. I enjoyed this fight a lot, and I thought that it was a very dominant performance. Very early on, he got caught by Sergey, but managed to control himself, keep his head on a swivel, and managed to get that nice 1-2 over Sergey, put him down, and finished him off with those hammer fists. After that, we had Yuri Prochazka versus Alex Pereira. Whether it was marked as an early stoppage or not, it was certainly an awesome fight to see, and I loved to see the outcome. I loved to see those guys go to war in the striking. Yuri proved that he still has it, and he managed to honestly land some pretty big shots on Pereira, and a couple of big combinations. He managed to follow Pereira against the cage, keep him on the back foot, and inevitably that was what won Prochazka a lot of those exchanges. But Pereira always comes in with that atomic bomb left hook. I think for the health and safety of Yuri, even from his own words, he says that it was a good stoppage. And with that, I'm going to say that this card is probably I'm having a tough time choosing between A and B. What I think I'm going to do is, because I already have a lot in the A tier, I'm going to put this one at the top of the B tier. They are not put towards the top for any ranking reason at all. They are just in the tiers that I've set them in. But for the sake of it, I will put this one at the top of the B tier to show that it is just below A tier, but I want to kind of split this up and not have the A tier be too flooded. So there you have it. There is my rankings of the pay-per-view cards of UFC in 2023. That was fun. I certainly enjoyed going back through and breaking down some of the cards that we've had this year. A bit of a trip down memory lane as well, because I got to talk about a lot of old videos I've made, as well as a lot of my opinions and reactions of those fights in the moment. So that is going to be all for today. Thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you did enjoy this UFC tier list video. This one is actually going to be quite long. I was expecting this to be a really short video and honestly be like 10 minutes long, but it's going to be pretty fucking long. I'm not sure if this one's going to have a great amount of retention. I'm not sure if you guys are super interested in these long videos. This one was, at first I was going to make this one a second channel video, but I decided that it's pretty heavily regarding MMA, and it is all about the main card stuff, and it's a lot of talks. It's essentially a mini podcast, so I decided that I'm gonna make this one a main channel video. So I hope you guys did enjoy. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe, comment what you think your favorite card of the year was, and if you disagree with anything that I put in this list, be sure to let me know also. Please go and check out my second channel, Mixed Martial Plus, if you're after any gaming content, as well as just some bonus stuff like some funny videos, reactions, all that sort of stuff. Like, subscribe, turn on notifications if you don't want to miss any future videos. Check out the reactions that will be coming out for UFC 296 very, very soon. The final card of the year. I am very excited for it. There's a lot of cool matchups, and I'm excited to see how some of those fights go down and what it's going to mean for those divisions with the champions fighting, as well as some big contender fights. So be sure to check it out. Thank you guys for joining me on this video. I hope you did enjoy. Once again, thank you, and I'll see you all in the next Mixed Martial Arts video. Goodbye.